The biggest lie ever told about narcissists and psychopaths didn't just create most of the confusion, misconceptions, and misunderstanding that are widely tossed around about these disordered personalities, but is a lie that literally changed the course of psychology overnight. As well, like the saying goes, a lie, when told repeatedly, will eventually be seen as the truth, especially when these lies are coming from figures of authority, like this one did when it was originated back in the 70s, having many catalysts behind what this lie was intended to protect, or rather, cover up, due to the economic crisis that was starting to emerge, the Vietnam War, civil rights movements, and the deinstitutionalization of psychiatric facilities, coupled with being in the brink of what was the golden age of serial killers, crimes, and cults, taking psychopathy and mental illness in its entirety from being something that most knew little about, let alone was openly discussed amongst the general public, to becoming the headline topic for a form of mass media, and the characteristics of psychopathy, something that now was becoming quite familiar due to the extensive coverage of these events, such as the Manson family in '69, where Charlie and his cult killed actress Sharon Tate right alongside the Zodiac killer's string of murders and taunting the police with bizarre letters about the crimes. In '71, the Attica prison riots, then Bundy's killing spree beginning in '72, the violent confrontations between the FBI, CONTELPRO operations, and the Black Panther Party, along with the Son of Sam terrorizing New York City, claiming to be under the command of a demonic dog. And well, is really no shocker that amidst all of these serial killings, riots, and individuals possessed by some demonic version of the Scooby-Doo shooting up New York City created quite a jolt in the fear factor department and level of concern that the public had. So when incidents such as the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy in '68 and the Watergate scandal in '72 that Nixon's administration then proceeded in trying to cover up, sure the fuck didn't earn Nixon or the government any brownie points or do any favors in rebuilding the sense of security and trust that the public had. And the more things started to unfold, the government's ability to have any sway over the public's opinion slipped through the cracks. No longer was the question of concern whether or not Nixon was a shady crook. Now, people were recognizing these patterns of behaviors and characteristics, like Ted Bundy, in some of the most powerful and elite political and public figures, leading to the APA's first attempt in trying to protect the reputation of political figures with their enactment of the Goldwater Rule, forbidding psychiatrists from offering their professional opinion or participating in discussions in any form of mass media about the mental state of politicians. Fortunately for the APA, and their anything but coincidental timing being just a few months after the break-in, causing many to see it as nothing more than a sugar-coated gag order, and others becoming appalled over the organization's willingness to put society at risk due to the potential dangers because of the power play at hand, quickly followed up by their next attempt with the makings and first steps of preparation to the Mecca lies that took place in 1974, when Dr. Robert Spitzer was nominated to be the chairman of the task force in the creation of the DSM-3, awarding Spitzer full reign and disclosure to handpick his task force members as he saw fit, most of whom that Spitzer knew through previous affiliations with the NIH or from within the halls of Columbia University. Remarkably, within little over a year of assigning this task force, Spitzer's team had produced the DSM-3's first draft. Not only included considerably more diagnoses and disorders than each of its predecessors, but 2 included far lengthier descriptions, prevalence in the population, risk factors, the short and long-term prognosis of them, as well as any comorbidities commonly seen with individuals acquiring such disorder. Now, with the first draft intact, few members of the task force would periodically get together and vote on each disorder as if it should or should not be included in the final version of the manual. And if the majority felt that it was valid, then into the DSM it went. And if there was an argument or someone did have objection, then ultimately the decision came down to Spitzer. Once all the disorders had been sorted through in 1977, Spitzer and his colleagues ran a total of 6 field trials, included about 500 participating psychiatrists, using this preliminary draft of the DSM, which contributed to more than 1,200 diagnoses that were made in total. 300 of these were then evaluated and compared for consistency. With the results being mildly encouraging, the final draft was submitted, consisting of 265 diagnosable disorders from its previous 182 that were recognized in the DSM-2. And in 1980 came the publishing of the DSM-3, changing the language of mental health and how mental health was viewed. In many ways, especially in the eyes of Spitzer, was deemed a success, as it created enormous professional and financial incentive for researchers, pharmaceutical companies, psychiatrists, and the government, despite the major controversy and criticism that arose after the release about this obvious lack of research and lack of validity due to all of the repetitive overlaps, comorbidities, as well as all of the influence that there was from the federal government. Some of the biggest issues included that of personality disorders, mainly in the area concerning antisocial personality disorder, aka psychopathy, was rebranded, so to speak, with the inclusion and making its first debut into the world of personality disorders, NPD, or narcissistic personality disorder, to which the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder was as following: having a grandiose sense of self-importance or uniqueness, preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited power, success, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, requiring constant attention and admiration, having cool indifference or marked feelings of rage in response to criticism, indifference, or defeat, a sense of entitlement, interpersonal exploitiveness or taking advantage of others, having a disregard for the rights of others, and having relationships that would alternate between extremes of over-idealization and devaluation. To which antisocial personality, going from what was listed in the DSM-2 as individuals who are incapable of significant loyalty, are grossly selfish, callous, irresponsible, impulsive, and unable to feel guilt, having a low tolerance for frustration, tend to blame others, or offer plausible rationalization for their behaviors, and that a mere history of repeated legal or social offenses are not sufficient in justifying a diagnosis for antisocial personality disorder. Then, at DSM-3, changing this criteria to now being having 3 or more of the following before the age of 15, such as truancy of at least 5 days per year for at least 2 years, not including the last year of school, expulsion or suspension from school, but only for misbehavior, delinquency that consists of being arrested or sent to juvenile detention due to their behavior, running away from home overnight at least twice while living in a parental or surrogate home, persistent lying, repeated sexual intercourse, repeated drunkenness or substance abuse, theft, vandalism, their school grades being markedly below the expectations, and initiation of fights, as well as at least 4 of the following manifestations to occur after the age of 18. 1. The inability to sustain consistent work behavior, as indicated by the following: too frequent of job changes, significant unemployment of 6 months to 5 years of no work, walking off or away from several jobs without having another one in line. 2. Lack of ability to function as a responsible parent, as evidenced by 1 or more of the following: child's malnutrition, child's illness resulting in a lack of minimal hygiene, failure to obtain medical care for a seriously ill or injured child, child being dependent upon neighbors or other relatives for food and shelter, failure to arrange child care for any child under the age of 6. 3. Failure to accept social norms with respect to lawful behavior, as indicated by repeated thefts, illegal occupation, such as pimping, prostitution, fencing, selling drugs, multiple arrests, or having a felony conviction. inability to maintain an enduring attachment with a sexual partner, as indicated by 2 or more divorces, separations, whether legally married or not, desertion of a spouse or significant partner, or promiscuity, 10 or more sexual partners within a 1-year time frame. Irritability or aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assault, failure to honor financial obligations, as indicated by repeated defaulting on debts, failure to provide child support, or failure to support other dependents on a regular basis. Failure to plan ahead, as indicated by traveling from place to place without a prearranged job or career, or a lack of having a fixed address for longer than a 1-month time frame. Having a disregard for truth, as indicated by repeated lying, use of alias, or conning others for their own personal profit. Recklessness, as indicated by driving while intoxicated or reoccurrent speeding, with a note to highlight that this disorder is often extremely incapacitating, failure to becoming an independent, self-supporting adult, oftentimes needing many years of institutionalization, more commonly being penile than medical. And that individuals who present the full picture of this disorder often are lacking in educational achievement that usually interferes or would prohibit them from holding political or public careers or achieving economical success. So, in a nutshell, essentially, the DSM-3 rebranded psychopathy as it were defined and described in the DSM-2 with narcissistic personality disorder, then changing the defining characteristics of antisocial personality disorder to now strictly having a criminal-based focus with specific crimes, rules, or social norms that these individuals commonly are known to break as to be what is required for them to receive such a diagnosis, as well as specifically highlighting and stressing the point that individuals with NPD often seek out or are drawn to leadership positions, including things such as politics, lawyer, CEO, or head of a company. But to the contrary, individuals with antisocial personality likely not have the capacity or ability due to their lack of education to do so. Now pretty much eliminates anyone in a high-ranking political or public position from being speculated on of their having antisocial personality disorder. That despite this rebranding, more or less just assigning a different name to the same disorder, still becomes far less alarming in the eyes of the public, regardless of the fact that description of narcissistic personality disorder isn't exactly describing some delight to be around or anyone that you want to actively go out and hunt down to become your roommate or partner, but it's still separating it from this human predator component, which becomes a shit ton less nerve-wracking to think of a political or high-ranking person with a lot of power over a nation through a narcissistic lens than it does someone whose behaviors and characteristics equate to these individuals who repeatedly are killing people and then dismembering or eating their remains. And one of the basic tools for the manipulation of reality is through the manipulation of words. Because by controlling the meaning of words, you in turn control the people who are using them. And by assuring that this message is conveyed in a manner appearing as if it has scientific evidence to back it and is presented by figures of authority, most will accept this meaning mindlessly and resign powerlessly to its consequences without even realizing it's happening. And that sadly, in many cases, such like this one, can be devastating. And nobody knows this better than those who work for organizations such as the APA and the NIH, who not only acquire data, conduct research, and study human behavior, but are also the gatekeepers of who has access to this research, what studies get approved, what studies get published, and whether or not the results are deemed reliable or valid, to which then gets used to be supporting diagnostic criteria of these diagnoses, rendering it difficult for the doctor to produce alternative perceptions outside of these distinctive categories categories without doubting or questioning the rules, as they are what gets attached to the coding necessary for insurance reimbursements, as well as the regulations required by the FDA to approve the medications that they're prescribing for these disorders. Not to mention all the dollar bill signs that help to drive this along through the controversy, strumming up a much greater need for research on these disorders. That Spitzer not only admits to being intentionally provoked by these changes, but further goes on to say that he's always been drawn to and enjoyed creating conflict, and that it often made him chuckle when he would learn years later about another issue this manual had created, in the knowing that he had part in what created it, as every word in that book had passed through his fingertips. Every word, which the reporter who did this interview with Spitzer goes on to write that it was almost as if Spitzer took more pride in the conflict than he did from the announcement of this revolutionizing psychology when it was first released, as well as many others that contributed in the creation of the DSM-3 have openly admitted during the multitude of interviews that were conducted and published years later, once the cat was out of the bag about this manual's lack of validity and research, eventually paved the way in revealing the shadiness and hypocrisy amongst much larger issues pertaining to the NIH and APA, such like that took place during the Bush administration, where the APA had secretly coordinated with officials from the CIA, the White House, and the Department of Defense, and their involvement with designing an interrogation program of what comes to be known as the torture program that enabled the Justice Department to argue that the program was illegal and that subjecting people to various combinations of stress positions, nudity, isolation, sleep deprivation, slapping, shaking, dog threats, death threats, sensory deprivation, extreme degrees of hot and cold, intense light, relentless noise, exploitation of personal phobias, cultural and sexual humiliations, and the sheer terror of waterboarding didn't constitute as torture, since the interrogations were being monitored and overseen by healthcare professionals and therefore made them safe. Doing so to remain on good graces as to enhance employment opportunities and to continue to be getting over $500 million funded by the U.S. government every year to continue on its research. That when realistically 97% of the diagnoses are invalid, as there are 14 of the almost 300 diagnosable disorders as it stands in the DSM-5. 14 have been considered as reliable, valid, legit mental disorders. One to which is included on this short list of 14 is antisocial personality disorder, which these creatures have existed since the beginning of mankind. They were describing these people in the book of Deuteronomy. And though the terminology may have changed due to the difference in language, culture, they were all still describing the same individuals with a complete lack of morals and a total disregard for others, which is not even really a matter of disordered personality, because their personality changes right along with their persona, morphing and shape-shifting themselves into whoever is in front of them. So of course they're going to come off with different behaviors, mannerisms, depending on who it is and where they are. And if what they're trying to get ahead of is to be the kingpin in a drug cartel, CEO of a company, general in a military, or to simply just be able to mooch off of people because they can. Some are going to be more susceptible to criminal activity than others, just due to the environment or whatever it is that they're going after, which is nothing new. And what sets them apart from any other mental illness, ailment, or issue is that person affected by this disorder is not the narcissist or a psychopath or whatever you want to call them. It is those that they abuse, that they manipulate, that they exploit, and that they destroy. And they don't see themselves as having a problem or being problematic. And they have no desire to change. And they're not. Just lucky for the psychopaths that our current treatment plan isn't to beat them to death with rocks like they
used to.
Which came to be because these individuals do not take to treatment, punishment, and no amount of love, empathy, or compassion in the world is going to change them any more than getting an official diagnosis. You cannot help anyone who doesn't want help, and they don't, period. End of story. Best thing that you can do if you think that you are dealing with one of these individuals is to pack yo shit and get the hell out of Dodge, because ain't nothing warm, fuzzy, or good coming from that. Nada. Zero, zilch, nunya. Fight for you. Focus on you. Fuck the narcissist, or whatever you want to call them.